Welcome to the first episode of the JBA podcast. I'm very, very grateful to say that we have our first guest today, who is Mr. Jackson, Headmaster of Jeppe. We're actually recording this in perhaps the scariest place at Jeppe, other than the rugby field, which is Mr. Jackson's office. And yeah, I'd like to now introduce Mr. Jonathan Hurvitz, who'll give some more context into what we're looking to achieve with the JBA podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. Guys, welcome to the first of hopefully many episodes in the JBA podcast series. As a committee, we took a view that we wanted to start to preserve Jeppe stories. We thought the best person to start this series off with was the Headmaster Dale Jackson. We hope to have many more episodes with topical stories of old boys and sports heroes and everybody who's come out of Jeppe. So we're looking really forward, and thank you to Chad for offering his time and helping us out, and obviously to Mr. Jackson for giving us the time. So yeah, without further ado, over to you, Chad.
Yeah, awesome. So sir, we're going to kick off today's questions with some quick fire questions, just giving some context maybe to those who don't know who you are. First off, which year did you matriculate at Jeppe?
Thanks, Chad. Thanks, Jonathan. And just before I answer that question, the answer is 1990, our centenary year. But before I go into that, just from my side, just a big thanks to the JBA and to you guys for initiating this concept, for preserving our history, for hopefully giving access to some of our alumni and our luminaries to the broader JBA network. I think it's a wonderful initiative, and hopefully it's going to garner much support, and this will be the first, hopefully, of many successful interviews and podcasts. So 100%. All the best going forward.
100%. So which house were you in when you matriculated?
So I was in the mighty Eland House, winners of the 1990 Interhouse Hockey, which is probably the last thing that Eland won. Headmasters are not meant to be parochial or assigned to any particular house, but I'm very proudly white. Yeah.
Very nice. And in saying that, so you're speaking about white. When you matriculated, did you have the honor of wearing that mighty white blazer? Did you have colours in anything upon you?
Sadly enough, Chad, my white blazer is still hanging up here. It's behind my more appropriate Headmaster's attire, but it's still one of my proudest assets that I've got. And yeah, I got full colours for hockey twice, cricket, academics, and half colours for tennis.
Okay, no pressure, Jonathan.
Don't worry, I wasn't even in the running for any type of colours.
Okay, so in saying that, obviously accomplished sportsman, what would you say was the greatest sporting moment you had during your time at Jeppe?
So, I mean, people would probably think that I'd say making SA Schools, and probably in my grade 11 year, because I made this SA Schools B-side from the provincial B-side, which at the time I think I was only the second person to have done that. So your SA Schools would probably be, but actually the biggest lesson I learned, the thing that stands out the most, was actually getting dropped from the first team cricket for my brother, who was a junior at the time, which is a whole story in itself, and relatively embarrassing. Yeah, it was a very interesting dinner conversation that night. But I ended up, as I said, getting colours for cricket, and I was a very average cricketer, and I would never ever have got colours for cricket if I hadn't been dropped. And I often say to boys nowadays that there's lots of lessons in adversity, and certainly the best lessons I've learned is being dropped, not making teams, and how you responded to that. And I know for a fact that if I hadn't have been dropped, I wouldn't have got colours for cricket. I wouldn't have gone on to achieve what I did, which was fairly mediocre, but certainly was above my talent level. And so if you ask me what was I most proud about, it was probably getting colours for cricket, because I certainly didn't deserve it from a talent perspective.
Awesome. And then on the cricket field, who was your favourite opponent to play against during your time as a Jeppe boy?
So I always enjoyed the challenge of facing King Edwards, and such is the nature of the King Edwards Jeppe rivalry that, you know, there's so many guys who I played against who are now big mates with. There's guys that I played with who still remain mates. So I always enjoyed the challenge of the King Edwards rivalry. I loved playing Maritzburg College. For whatever reason, I always had a huge respect for Maritzburg College, and particularly the Mark Bechet coached teams of cricket and hockey. So yeah, those were probably my two favourite encounters. On a hockey field, Maritzburg College was, in my view, the pinnacle, and so that was a great challenge. And just the rivalry and the context, the Joburg relationships, the fact that you had so many friends at schools like King Edward's was always a great opportunity.
And then on the antithesis of that, who was your least favourite opponent to play against?
I genuinely can't think of a least favourite opponent.
Yeah.
I think there were tough opponents to play against. In a headmaster context nowadays, when you play against schools like Uffies at rugby, those are tough, but all of those have lessons, and I'm not sure too many sportsmen of any level walk onto a field disappointed to be there. It's such a privilege when you go on, coming out of COVID when we didn't have sport for 18 months. I think if anyone goes onto a sporting field, whether you win or lose, and come away with it saying it was a least favourite experience, you probably need to examine why you're playing the sport.
100%.
So there were some tough encounters. There were some good schools you played against and some good teams you played against, and we got some hardings, but I wouldn't have changed any of that.
Awesome. Favourite opponent to play against now is Jeppe Headmaster.
From a headmaster context, public school-wise, I still enjoy the King Edward's fixture. There's a lot of pressure and there's a lot of hype around the King Edward's fixture, but the two schools are very similarly aligned in their ethos. Again, lots of friends on the King Edward staff, lots of boys who go on to become very good friends after that, and so I think that's a very important relationship for us as a school. From an independent school perspective, perhaps because we both were birthed through the same parish who founded both Jeppe and St. John's, I've always had a great respect for the St. John's ethos and culture and their soul. So I really enjoy the St. John's fixture. But again, even when we go across to Uffies in Pretoria and walk away with no victories, it's still a great experience. It's there's still wonderful South African education institutions. There's lots of lessons to be had there. So again, even as a headmaster, I think if you're going to certain fixtures not looking forward to them, you've got to ask yourself, why are you involved in those fixtures then?
100%. So you wouldn't say that you fall victim to Uffies fever, so...
No, I love playing against Uffies, and one day we're gonna come away.
So I have to ask, you've experienced so many versions of Jeppe, but in your mind, what is the one constant that Jeppe has always offered?
So I think Jeppe's always had a fairly unique, although most schools would I think claim to have a similar ethos, a fairly unique brotherhood. I think the camaraderie and the sense of family that exists not only amongst the boys but amongst the old boys. My wife very uncharitably calls it a cult, but I think that's probably going a little too far. But that sense of family has always been very strong throughout Jeppe's history. I mean, even from certainly my father's day in the 60s. My grandfather came here in the 20s. Certainly my time in the 80s. It's always been something, a school which the boys hold very central to their lives. It's a defining aspect of a Jeppe boy's life is the school that he went to. It's not just a 5-year period in his life. It's a defining aspect of his life. And if channeled correctly, that can be extremely powerful. As I say to the old boys every time I meet them, they are our biggest competitive advantage. It's why the JBA is so important to our school. If we can harness the collective power of 8,000 old boys, whether it's through word of mouth, sending their boys back to the school, financial contributions, their expertise, their time, the world is our oyster. Our achievements are limitless. And so I really do believe that sense of family, that brotherhood, that centricity of the school to who we are as adults is quite unique. And I think that manifests in a certain passion for their school amongst the old boys, which is very unusual in not only a South African context, but a world context.
So it's quite interesting because you were here at a very different time to what South Africa looks like now. Has there been anything that you have tried to recreate from your time versus what you operate and run now? Because I think the landscape is vastly different, and certainly Jeppe is a very different place. South Africa is a very different place.
I mean, in my opinion, undoubtedly so. Without argument, Jeppe is a far better school than when I was a schoolboy here. I think a lot of that is due to the diversity which exists within our school. Certainly diversity is something which we embrace. We think our school, from a sporting perspective, a pastoral perspective, an academic perspective, is a far richer and far better place than it was 30 years ago, and look, I'm very proud to have been a Jeppe old boy, and I had wonderful memories, and there were some good achievements in my time at the school, but I think that the current generation of boys, teachers, have stood on those shoulders and really advanced our successes. And I think Jeppe is a microcosm of what's possible in our country. It's the reason I've chosen to work here for the past 16 years, in that I really do believe that if Jeppe can succeed, so can other aspects of our country succeed, whether it's healthcare or policing or corporates or other sectors of our education. And I think we are a microcosm of what's possible. So certainly very proud of my time at the school, but I really do believe that the school is in a far better place than we were 30 years ago.
Yeah. Something that myself and Jonathan were speaking about with the inception of this podcast is highlighting not only Jeppe as a school, but the old boys and those who we're looking to speak to through the episodes. And obviously those who know you in a more formal context so will know that you have the coveted CASA next to your name. You're obviously a chartered accountant. So please just explain to us the journey. How did you go from a CASA to Headmaster of Jeppe?
My wife still asks me that question. She married a CA and ended up with a teacher, and she says that wasn't her envisaged path for our journey either. It was, certainly it wasn't planned. At best, it was probably a case of following my heart, which is something that I've always promised myself that I'd do since my father died when I was 22. I always said that I would never work for money. I'd always work for a passion, something I believed in, a cause that I identified with, and where I could make the biggest difference. And in about 2009, I offered the then headmaster, Mr. Dempsey, offered that I'd come here and spend a term volunteering at the school, and really never left. And even then in 2009, I had no intention of staying longer than a term. I had no intention of being headmaster. I certainly wasn't a strategic aim of mine when I left school, when I became a CA. But when I spent some time at Jeppe during the time I was volunteering, I realized that this was a place that had some magic, that was very special. It was an organization that I thought could change the country, could be a model for what's possible in our country, and where I thought that I could make a difference. And so that's what led me into that role.
Awesome. And then going back to your time wearing the black and white blazer, so what would you say was the standout moment for you, the most memorable moment while wearing that black and white blazer?
I think probably the day that I was announced as head boy. That was certainly sort of something which I'd probably dreamed of to an extent since I walked through those gates. And obviously, as I said, being a third generation boy and having grown up really at Quandam, where my dad was president and that kind of stuff, that was a real honor for me, particularly in our centenary year. So that would certainly stand out. But what's the most important thing of my time at Jeppe is probably the mates that I made, which I imagine is similar to all of us. The symbols on your report or the wins and losses on a sports field, they tend to fade over time, but the mates that you still are still central to your life. And I've got probably of my 5 best mates, 4 of them are, maybe even 5 of them are Jeppe old boys. In different walks of life, many of whom I weren't particularly friendly with at school, but we all have that common Jeppe golden thread running through us. And so, that's probably the thing that I hold on to most, the friends that I made for life at the school, and the lessons that I learned that probably are not quantifiable. I can't, talk to a win or a loss or a symbol on a report. It's the kind of stuff that happens on tours or at break. Or
do you think that your time as head boy and as a schoolboy gave you the foundation to lead the school and just in general leadership?
I mean, I think your time as a head boy certainly exposed you for the first time around the complexities of leadership. I think the reality is that all head boys probably underachieve hugely in terms of what they think they're going to achieve, and that the role is, in a large respect, ceremonial. We think we make a huge difference as head boys, but looking back on it, Jeppe's a very well-oiled, well-functioning machine. But it certainly gave me a grounding for a passion for the school and a real sense of appreciation of what the school did for me and my family, which I want to give back and have wanted to give back to boys over the last few years. That opportunity, I have no doubt that if it wasn't for Jeppe, I would not be sitting here, because my father would not have had the opportunity to come to the school. And so Jeppe, in the context of my family, my life, hence my children's life, their children's life, has been central, and I felt that we owed a debt of gratitude as a family and personally to Jeppe to repay that to as many children in the generations that came. I think there is a limit, and there are definitely downsides to the value of an old boy being a headmaster of his school. I'm under no illusions that my biggest weakness is that I've only taught at Jeppe, and one has continually, in my view, guard against the blind spots that result from that, and continually test those blind spots by bringing in people from different walks of life, different backgrounds, going out and trying to find out as much as possible that other schools do things, because certainly Jeppe's not a perfect school, and I'm definitely not a perfect leader. So the more that I can find out about what I don't know and where we can do better, the better. So I think it's a double-edged sword. I'm certainly very proud of it, but I think I always have to be cognizant of my blind spots in not looking outside as to where we can do things much better.
Awesome. During my time at Jeppe taught me countless things, but the one word you definitely taught me so was the word holistic, because it was emphasized by you so greatly in all your speeches. So
Someone listened. Thank you.
yeah. So in saying that, what does a holistic education mean to you, and why is it so greatly emphasized at Jeppe?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, Chad, because to many people, education is the symbols on their reports that when they walk out of those gates for the final time. And whilst those are important, what's far, far more important is who you are, not what you are. And holistic education implies that as much, if not more, learning takes place outside of the walls of the classroom than take place inside the walls. And I would argue that the most valuable lessons are not the lessons that take place in a classroom. Those are the lessons that take place on a pool or a stage or an astro or in a boarding house or on a tour. And I think that is one of the benefits of an education at a school like Jeppe or King Edward's or Maritzburg College, in that the learning is so all-encompassing. And it's at its foundation is a pastoral and a emphasis on character and on the person. And a manifestation of that comes through hard work and potentially results on a report or wins and losses on a scoreboard. But all of those pale into irrelevance and insignificance if the man at their core is not someone who can be trusted, who has integrity, etc. And so the definition of holistic is understanding that it's not just about what takes place in a classroom. And I'm not sure all schools have the same philosophy. And it worries me that there's such an emphasis on symbols on a report, because I think many of us who've had careers will attest to the fact that whilst those symbols may open doors, really what gets you through and what is central to your success is who you are as a person. Can you be trusted when the chips are down? Have you got resilience? Have you got integrity? And if you're just solving for X, I'm not sure that you're necessarily developing that.
Yeah. But despite saying that, so it's an undeniable fact that since taking over as headmaster, there has been this greater emphasis on academics, and we've seen this through the results that Jeppe has presented over the last few years. But what would you say are some of those strategies that you've brought in place within the school to ensure this greater emphasis on academics?
I think like many boys' schools, Jeppe was at times in our past accused of being a sports academy. And I think there was some validity in that. And certainly when I became headmaster, I was on record as saying that my number one priority was to change the academic culture and improve the performance. And so we do that in a variety of ways. We build innovation hubs, which focus on academic excellence with the support, the significant support of the whole boys community. We employ educators who are first and foremost educators and not rugby coaches or hockey coaches, and who have a passion for their subject. We push all boys to achieve their best potential. So my view has always been that if you're a good hockey player, we'll turn you into a great hockey player. If you're a good rugby player, we'll turn you into a great rugby player. If you're a good academic, will we turn you into a great academic? I'm not sure if that's always been the case in the past. The boy who gets 1 distinction, does he get 3 by coming to Jeppe? The boy who gets 8, does he get 10? And the boy who's on the brink of failing, do we get him a diploma or a bachelor pass? And so we've really tried to focus throughout the grades, throughout the subjects, in making sure that we improve that performance. And the statistics will show you that over the last X number of years, we've gradually improved that performance to the extent now that in many of the subjects we're leading in our district, a district that has many of those colleague boys' schools that I spoke about earlier. We have achieved now the elusive 100% pass rate. We've got a bachelor pass rate well into the 80s. And most importantly, when you take away all the stats, the majority of boys are reaching their potential, which is why we're here. Stats are really important, but behind those stats are individual boys who perhaps are getting into a BCom course that they may not have got into before, a medical course, or be an apprenticeship, or getting a matric. And those are the stories that have the most impact and are the most meaningful from an academic perspective, not actually the stats, the boys behind the stats.
Yeah. And then being appointed as headmaster in 2018, obviously 2 years later, 2020, it was my matric year, COVID happened. I know as a student, there were so many challenges that COVID brought about. I can't even imagine as management and as teachers. So could you just give us some context into what were some of those challenges?
Yeah, I think those challenges are not unique to Jeppe or to education. Anyone who ran any kind of organization, any kind of business, had any kind of leadership responsibility, politicians, etc., they all were navigating uncharted territory and very scary territory, because it wasn't just an impact on what our matric results give about. You were literally dealing with life and death, and you were called upon by your community in many respects to suddenly lead a community of boys, of parents, of old boys who looked at people who were educators initially, but now became, as I say, leaders in that community. So it was a real challenge from a leadership perspective. And I don't want to diminish that challenge, because people lost lives, they lost livelihoods. But in many respects, I learned the most about myself through the COVID period. It accelerated my learning as a leader probably tenfold. And I certainly would never want to go through that again. But I think it was one of the most valuable experiences that I went through as a leader. The learnings were infinite. We learned to communicate in a very different way. I was on a Zoom call this morning. If you'd asked me in 2019 what Zoom was, I wouldn't have been able to tell you. We learned that no matter how big the obstacle, you can overcome it and in fact come through it stronger. Our strongest results, as you may know, was in 2021, where we got 100% pass rate, and that would never have been predicted going into COVID, that academically it would be a blessing from a COVID perspective. We learned the importance and why we play sport, because for a year and a half, guys in your matric year didn't. And then when we came back to play sport, we realized that it didn't actually matter if you won or lost, because it was a huge privilege just to be out there and to be playing. We learned the privilege of being thankful for every day, because we had family members who passed away from a disease which a few months before no one had ever heard of. And so we learned the value of giving it your all, not wasting your time here on earth, making a difference. And so I think COVID was probably the hardest leadership challenge that I or people of my generation have been through. It's probably one of the defining things that we'll look back at the history, 134 history of Jeppe, and look through Boer Wars and World Wars, and COVID will be put into that bracket of challenge. But at the same time, it was, I think, quite seminal in the journey of Jeppe in a positive way, in that we learned so many positive things about ourselves, and certainly undoubtedly came out of COVID as a school far stronger than when we went into it, although there was much hurt individually and as a family on that journey.
So I have my own tutoring business, and I tutor a few Jeppe boys, should I rather say, and I've noticed that they utilize their Google Classroom a lot. So would you say that's something that Jeppe also learns as a school, is looking at online resources as a way of enhancing this holistic experience? So
sometimes, it's more about blind luck than strategy. And in this case, our improvements in academic results, our being ahead of the curve in terms of technology, Google Classroom and all of that kind of thing, which we undoubtedly were. We were recognized in both a public school and an independent school context as really, from a COVID learning perspective, being ahead of the curve. and there's numerous examples of that, one of which is our academic results. But, part of that was pure blind luck, as I said. In 2018, when we became head, I thought our academic results were really our Achilles heel. And one of the key ways, the main way that we could close that gap, myself, management, and the governing body believed, was to invest in technology. And so we invested very heavily in technology from pretty much your grade 8 year. If you remember Mr. Rob Faltermeyer, who's also an old boy, he was, we pivoted his role from a history and a civil technology teacher into really an academic innovator and in charge, director of technology essentially. And for 3 years, basically, Rob did very little teaching, but he went around the country and around the world on courses from a technology perspective, which at the time we had no idea that it would have any relevance or bearing or advantage when it came to something like COVID, because we had no idea what COVID was. But when COVID hit, as a result, we had all the training of our staff in place. We pivoted to the Google Suites for Education products. We knew how to use, as a Google Classroom. We had all the technology in place from an infrastructure perspective. And so we were seamlessly able to pivot to online learning, and that's still the case. We had at one stage 400 Google Classrooms. Google Classrooms are now ubiquitous at Jeppe, which I acknowledge is the case at most well-resourced schools, but certainly has been ubiquitous at Jeppe for at least beginning of 2020 in your matric year. And so we were very fortunate. I can't pretend to be any kind of visionary or strategic genius, but maybe sometimes hard work. If you prepared to work hard, you have unintended consequence, unintended benefits, and this was probably one of those.
Undeniably. So going back to your family and the way that you guys have played a big part in Jeppe, and perhaps Jeppe's played a big part in your family as well. But in terms of the Theo Jackson Scholarship Foundation, you're obviously a founding member and a trustee. Could you just speak to the start and the growth of this foundation and how it's been able to help over 120 Jeppe boys in the process?
Yeah, so most, but I acknowledge not all, listeners will be familiar with Theo Jackson Scholarship. So a very brief background to it is that my dad was an orphan. He was adopted and put into Jeppe in 1961, and really Jeppe, in my view, saved my dad. And he went on to become chairman of our Old Boys Club and chairman of the rugby club and founded the athletics section. And so Jeppe was always very central to, as I said earlier, our lives growing up. When my dad unfortunately passed away at a very young age, at 48 in 1995, my brother and I had always had at the back of our minds our desire to give back to one boy the opportunity that he'd had. And so we donated our inheritance in 2004, when we were a little bit more mature. We were quite young when my dad passed, and we came to Kevin Tate and said, here's enough money to put one boy through school. His name was Kerem Goldstein. He's now in Australia. He's one of the guys I'm very, very proud of. And that was really our aim. One boy, give it back. And I went on with my career as a CA. At that stage, I was not very involved at Jeppe at all. And for various reasons, none of which, again, were strategic, that scholarship has grown over the last 20 years into the largest single school scholarship for boys in the country, with 60 boys roughly currently on that scholarship and well over 120 alumni, as you said. And probably is the thing that I'm most proud about in the context of my life outside of my family and my wife. And that scholarship is primarily aimed at orphans or boys from disadvantaged backgrounds, which may then come with the connotation that those boys are a charity or a handout, but that couldn't be further from the truth. 3 of our last head boys have been on the Theo Jackson Scholarship Fund. We've had international sportsmen, we've had SA school sportsmen, we've had Aaron Tennyson, 10 distinctions, the most in the history of the school, was announced from the scholarship fund. And so I think the Theo Jackson Scholarship has really become quite central to life at Jeppe, and is an organisation which all Jeppe boys and old boys can and should be extremely proud of, because it has been a community scholarship. It has received support from people right across the community, old boys, current parents, members of the community, and again is an example which other schools are trying to replicate. I'm meeting with an independent school, a very, very well-known independent school next week, who wants to try and replicate the success of the scholarship, which we are more than happy to do, because if you had 100 versions of the Theo Jackson Scholarship Fund at schools throughout the country. The beneficiaries of that would be, disadvantaged boys who are given opportunity at an education like this, and are able to then get an education, educate their families, and hopefully make a difference to our country. So, yeah, it's a scholarship fund or an institution which, as I say, the Jeppe family can and should be extremely proud of.
Going back to your proudest moment as a Jeppe boy, when you said your favourite opponent to play against as a Jeppe headmaster, so I really thought you were going to have a cheeky nod towards Grey College there. But nevertheless, what has been your proudest moment as Jeppe headmaster this far?
Yeah, I think it's probably quite varied. It doesn't make the headlines, but, a boy who you never thought would get through matric, getting a matric, or a guy coming up to you as he gets his matric final results and giving you a hug and saying that, you made a difference. Those are the things that really keep educators going. They don't necessarily make the headlines. The stuff that makes the headlines is, beating Grey College and winning Aikens 7 in 8 years and getting 100% pass rates. And those are important. And from a marketing perspective and a storytelling perspective, and as tangible evidence of the hopefully the good work that we're doing, that's the outcome. But the process is so much more important than the outcome, and it's the untold stories that really make the difference. You guys, both old boys, both sitting here, the stuff that makes the difference in your lives that you remember are probably not the stuff that wrote the headlines. And I think that's true for, the vast majority of boys that come out of Jeppe. There's only a couple of them going to have the glory of beating Grey College. But every one of them gets exposed to moments of magic with educators in the boarding houses on tour. And even as a headmaster, that's what really keeps me coming back, the individual lives that you are touching and making a difference to.
Yeah. And looking back on these last 6 years, aside from the challenges that COVID presented, was there perhaps another moment that was just really tough to conquer? And what would you say that you learned from that moment?
It's obviously quite raw, but Caden Bowie's passing earlier this year really deeply affected everyone, from myself as headmaster right the way educators, boys, old boys. Probably the circumstances, in particular, the fact that it happened whilst representing Jeppe in full view of a number of his teammates and his friends and his schoolmasters. Unfortunately, the reality of life is that there is death, and he wasn't the first boy to die during my time at Jeppe, but more often it happens in a hospital or in a home or a car accident, and that doesn't make it any easier for that particular family, but it's not as raw for the community. In our case, we all felt a deep connection with what happened with Caden and his family, and that was a very difficult challenge to me to navigate as a headmaster, because I was required to be a very strong leader and to answer questions like why, when I had no answers to those questions, and I was just as deeply impacted as the boys were and the schoolmasters were and the educators were. So that was a real challenge, but again, you learned a huge amount in that process. Learned a lot about myself, learned a lot about leadership, learned a lot about the strength of our community, learned a huge amount about the strength and the collegiality of the boys' school community, and how much love and support there is in the broader boys' school community, and indeed in our old boys community. The strength and the support of the old boys and the old boys community and our parent community in that process meant a huge amount to us, and it just re-emphasized again the importance of family.
So obviously, you've accomplished so many things over your short period with Jeppe as headmaster, but I have to ask, what is that one thing that you're still looking to accomplish in your tenure as headmaster?
Look, infrastructurally, I'd love to get a high performance centre built, as Jonathan know from the JBA. That's very much our focus from a fundraising perspective. We've been successful in building an innovation hub a couple of years ago. We're just about to finish our art centre, which is a hugely impressive building. But that high performance centre, I think, will really take the sporting experience for our 1,060 boys to another level. So that's certainly something I would love to leave. And once that's finished, there'll be other projects like central dining facilities and purchase of additional houses and a hockey pavilion, etc. But that's the focus infrastructurally. You always want to, from a sporting perspective, continue to have your wins and your Aitkins and your grey highs. But really there we really want to give each boy the best opportunity of reaching his potential at Jeppe. Brendan Gittins, former deputy headmaster here and now at my class, always spoke about the experience of the average Jeppe boy. What's the experience of the boy in the under 14E side? Is that as positive as the boy in the first team rugby? And making sure that is the case, because those boys are just as important. And to be honest, as old boys often are the drivers of our old boys. It's very seldom the head boys and the first team captains that have that level of passion and drive. It's often the unsung heroes that come back. And so we want to create the experience for the average Jeppe boy, and to make that experience as strong as possible. But at its core, we need to continue to improve our academic results. So if you said to me, what is your one ambition? It's to sustainably have strong academic results, 100% pass rate, bachelors in the 80s, and to make sure that every Jeppe boy, when he comes out of here, whether he wants to be a natural scientist or a teacher or a plumber or a doctor, has the opportunity to do that. That at our core, we're an academic institution who hopefully give the boys the skills and the character to be able to achieve that. And we need to continue focusing on that academic excellence.
Perfect. And then, so to conclude, myself and Jonathan were deciding what was the best way to end a podcast, and we decided that we're going to ask a question to all our guests, and that question is going to be, what is the greatest thing that Jeppe has taught you?
That's a wonderful question. I think Jeppe's taught me the importance of family. Jeppe's taught me that it's not where you've come from, but where you're going. Jeppe's taught me that anything's possible. Jeppe's taught me that it's not about the size of your bank balance, but the impact that you have, how much difference you're able to make. And living a life of meaning rather than a life of statistics or a life of achievements. It's a very, very special place, as are many similar schools. But from a Jeppe perspective, when I'm on my deathbed one day, this will probably be the thing that I look back with the most pride, having and the most fondness and the most positive memories. My time that I've spent here, and the friendships that I've made, and hopefully the lives that we've impacted.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, sir. It's an absolute pleasure. And to those watching, we do want to let you know that this is obviously only the first episode. We're looking to post these bi-weekly. See you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for watching.
Thanks,
awesome.
guys. Thanks, guys.
All we see is the